Hi, I'm Erick Mendez. The day I got the call that my twin brother died in a car accident overseas, I cried for 3 days straight. The day I walked into a wedding venue in Miami and saw him standing at the altar wearing my face, my name, and my entire life, I didn't cry at all. I smiled, because some battles aren't won with fists or fury. They're won with patience, precision, and a paper trail that doesn't lie. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March while I was replacing the alternator on a '68 Mustang in my garage. My hands were black with grease, sweat pooling at my temples despite the cool Portland air filtering through the open bay door. The number flashed international, somewhere in Southeast Asia. I almost didn't answer. Almost. A woman's voice, heavily accented, formal in that rehearsed way that customer service representatives use when delivering bad news. Mr. Mendez, I'm calling from the United States Embassy in Bangkok. I need to inform you that your brother, Marcus Mendez, was involved in a fatal traffic collision 3 days ago. We've been trying to reach next of kin. The wrench slipped from my grip and clattered against the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the garage like a gunshot. Marcus, my twin, the other half of a hole that had been fractured since we were kids but never fully broken. Dead. She kept talking, something about arrangements, about remains, about paperwork that needed signing. I heard maybe half of it. The rest got lost in the sudden hollow ringing in my ears. When I finally managed to speak, my voice came out strangled. Are you certain it's him? Positive identification through dental records and passport, she said. I'm very sorry for your loss. I thanked her mechanically, hung up, and stood there in my garage staring at the Mustang's exposed engine like it held answers it couldn't possibly give. Marcus was dead. My brother, my twin, the guy who used to finish my sentences and knew when I was lying before I even opened my mouth. Gone. The funeral arrangements fell to me. Mom had passed when we were 19, Dad 3 years after that. It was just us, and now it was just me. The embassy shipped his belongings in a cardboard box that arrived 4 days later. I opened it on my kitchen table under the cold fluorescent light. A wallet with his ID, some clothes, a cheap watch I didn't recognize, and a phone that was water-damaged beyond recovery. I held his driver's license between my fingers and studied the photo. Same face as mine, down to the small scar above the left eyebrow from when we'd crashed our bikes racing down Anderson Hill when we were 12. People used to joke they couldn't tell us apart. Even Mom mixed us up sometimes when we were little. Looking at that license felt like staring into a mirror that showed a future I'd never reach. The memorial service was small. A handful of people from the neighborhood, a couple of his old co-workers from the warehouse job he'd quit 2 years ago before heading overseas. Everyone offered condolences I barely registered. I stood there in a black suit that felt too tight, nodding, shaking hands, accepting casseroles I'd never eat. It was Mrs. Patterson from 3 houses down who said something that stuck. She squeezed my hand with her papery fingers and whispered, "At least you two made peace before he left. I heard you'd been talking again, working things out." I smiled politely and said nothing. But inside, a small alarm bell started ringing. Marcus and I hadn't spoken in almost 8 months. Our last conversation had ended in a shouting match over money he owed me, $2,000 he'd borrowed and never returned. We hadn't made peace. We'd barely made contact. That night, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. Started going through my accounts, just routine checks. Bank statements, credit cards, the usual. Everything looked normal at first. Then I noticed something in my credit report I'd pulled for a refinance application the month before. An inquiry from a mortgage company I'd never contacted, dated 6 weeks ago. I called them the next morning, waited on hold for 17 minutes listening to elevator jazz before a representative picked up. I asked about the inquiry. She pulled up my file. "Oh yes, Mr. Mendez, you were pre-approved for the home loan. Congratulations on your new property in Florida." "I don't own property in Florida," I said slowly. There was a pause. "According to our records, you closed on a 3-bedroom townhouse in Coral Gables on February 9th. I asked her to repeat the address. She did. I wrote it down on the back of an envelope, my hand suddenly unsteady. That was 5 weeks before Marcus supposedly died in Bangkok. I hung up and immediately called my bank. Asked them to pull transaction records going back 6 months. They sent them over within an hour. I printed every page and spread them across my dining table like I was planning a heist. Most charges were mine. Gas stations near my shop, the grocery store I always used, my usual coffee place downtown. But then I started seeing others. Charges in Seattle when I'd been in Portland. A hotel in Las Vegas during a week I'd never left my garage. An airline ticket to Miami I never booked. Each fraudulent charge was small enough not to trigger alerts. $50 here, $120 there, never more than $300 at once. Someone was being careful. Someone who knew exactly how much they could take without raising red flags. I pulled my passport from the filing cabinet where I kept important documents. Still there, untouched. But tucked behind it was something that shouldn't have been. A photocopy of my birth certificate. I never made photocopies. I kept originals in my safe deposit box at the bank. The next morning, I drove to the bank and checked the box. My birth certificate was gone. So was my Social Security card. In their place was a note scribbled on a torn piece of notebook paper. "Thanks for everything, bro. Don't worry, I'll take good care of it." Marcus's handwriting, unmistakable. The same slanted scrawl he'd used since we were kids learning cursive together. I sat in that small private room at the bank for 20 minutes, just staring at the note. Marcus wasn't dead. My brother had faked his death and stolen my identity. The implications rolled over me in waves. The mortgage in Florida, the credit inquiries, the small fraudulent charges testing the waters. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. I didn't scream, didn't punch the wall or throw things or any of the reactions you'd expect. Instead, I folded the note carefully, placed it in my wallet, and walked out of the bank with my head clear and my jaw set. Because the thing about growing up with someone who shares your face is you learn early how to outthink them. Marcus always went for the quick score, the easy win. I played the long game. Back home, I made a list. Everything I needed to do, every account that needed securing, every institution that needed alerting. I started with a fraud report to the credit bureaus, froze my credit completely. Then I called every bank, every credit card company, every utility in my name, changed passwords, added security questions with answers only I would know, answers that referenced things Marcus had never been part of. I documented everything. Timestamps, reference numbers, the names of every representative I spoke with. I bought a thick binder from the office supply store and started building my case. Bank statements with fraudulent charges highlighted in yellow, copies of police reports, correspondence with the credit bureaus, the note from my safety deposit box, photographed and preserved in a plastic sleeve. 3 days into my investigation, I got a notification from a credit monitoring service I'd signed up for. Someone had attempted to open a new credit card in my name. The application came from an IP address in Miami, Florida, same city as the townhouse. I sat back in my chair and allowed myself a thin smile. He wasn't even being careful anymore. He thought I believed he was dead, thought he was safe. That's when I decided to do something that would have sounded insane to anyone else. I booked a flight to Miami, not to confront him, not yet, just to watch, to understand the full scope of what he'd built with my stolen life. The flight landed at Miami International on a humid Thursday afternoon. I rented a car under my mother's maiden name, paid cash, and drove to Coral Gables. The address from the mortgage company led me to a gated community with palm trees lining the streets and luxury cars in every driveway. The townhouse was at the end of a cul-de-sac, white stucco with a red tile roof and a small fountain in the front yard. I parked 3 houses down and waited. An hour passed, then another. Just as I was considering leaving, a silver BMW pulled into the driveway. The driver's door opened and out stepped my brother. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Marcus, alive, wearing clothes I'd never seen him wear, designer jeans, and a polo shirt that probably cost more than I made in a week at the garage. But it was his face that stopped me cold. Our face. He'd grown his hair out differently, styled it with product that made it look deliberately messy. He wore sunglasses I didn't recognize. But take away those small differences, and we were still identical, still mirror images of each other. He walked to the passenger side and opened the door. A woman stepped out, tall, blonde, wearing a sundress and heels. She laughed at something he said, looped her arm through his, and they walked into the house together. I sat in that rental car for another 2 hours, watching lights turn on inside, shadows moving past windows. My brother was living my life in a house bought with my credit, with a woman who thought she knew him, who thought he was me. Over the next week, I became a ghost in Miami. I followed Marcus everywhere, learned his routine. He had a job at a financial consulting firm downtown, went by my name, used my social security number on all his employment paperwork. Every morning, he left the townhouse at 7:15, stopped at the same coffee shop, arrived at his office by 8. He had lunch meetings at expensive restaurants, played golf on Wednesday afternoons. The woman was named Sophia. She worked in real estate, drove the BMW, and from what I could piece together from overheard phone conversations, she thought she was engaged to Erick Mendez, successful financial consultant who'd moved to Miami from Portland 6 months ago for a fresh start. 6 months. He'd been living as me for half a year. I rented a small efficiency apartment in a different part of town and set up a base of operations. Covered one wall with a timeline, mapping out every fraudulent action, every stolen piece of my identity. I pulled credit reports daily, monitoring for new activity. I contacted the Social Security Administration and reported identity theft, filed reports with local police in both Portland and Miami. But I didn't approach Marcus, not yet, because I needed to understand everything he'd built, every lie, every stolen dollar, every person he'd deceived using my name. Only then could I dismantle it completely. On my 9th day in Miami, I was sitting in my rental car outside his office building when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Mendez?" A man's voice, professional, clipped. "Speaking? This is Detective Raymond Chen with Miami-Dade Police Department. We received your identity theft report. I'd like to meet with you to discuss the case." I met Detective Chen at a coffee shop in Little Havana the next morning. He was late 40s, sharp eyes, the kind of cop who'd seen enough fraud cases to know when something didn't add up. I brought my binder, now 3 inches thick with documentation. He listened while I laid it all out. The faked death, the stolen documents, the mortgage fraud, the job obtained with my credentials. I showed him bank statements, credit reports, the note from my safety deposit box, everything. When I finished, he sat back and studied me carefully. "This is your twin brother?" I nodded. "And he's been impersonating you for 6 months? At least, maybe longer." Detective Chen flipped through my binder, taking his time, occasionally making notes. "This is extremely thorough documentation. Most identity theft victims don't have half this information." "I grew up with him," I said. "I know how he thinks. He goes for shortcuts, assumes people won't look closely, but I've always looked closely." The detective closed the binder. "Here's what I can do. We'll open an investigation. With this level of evidence, we can likely get warrants. But I need to tell you, cases like this, especially involving family, they get complicated. Are you prepared for where this might lead?" I met his eyes. "He stole my life. I'm prepared to take it back." 2 weeks later, I got a call from Sophia. She'd somehow gotten my actual cell number, not the one Marcus had been using. Her voice was shaking when she spoke. "Is this Erick Mendez? The real Erick Mendez?" I'd been expecting this call. Detective Chen had warned me they'd contacted her as part of the investigation. "Yes," I said, calmly. She started crying, told me everything, how Marcus had swept her off her feet,
how he'd proposed 3 months ago, how the wedding was scheduled for next Saturday at a venue in South Beach, how the invitations had already been sent, how her parents had flown in from California, how she'd used her savings for the down payment on the townhouse because his credit was temporarily complicated from the move. She didn't know. None of them knew. I could have been angry at her, could have blamed her for not seeing through him. But she was another victim in Marcus's long con, just one more person whose trust he'd weaponized. I asked her one question. Is the wedding still happening? She paused. The venue is paid for. The guests are coming. I don't know what to do. Don't cancel it, I said. I'll be there. The next 6 days were a blur of preparation. Detective Chen wanted to coordinate the arrest with maximum impact. We decided the wedding itself would be the perfect moment, public, undeniable, with dozens of witnesses who could testify to the fraud. I spent those days finalizing every piece of evidence. I pulled phone records showing Marcus had called the embassy in Bangkok himself to report his own death. I tracked down the person he'd paid to fake the accident scene photos. I documented every cent he'd stolen, every application he'd filed in my name, every lie he'd told Sophia and her family. On Friday night, I drove past the townhouse one last time, saw the lights on inside, saw moving shadows that could have been Marcus and Sophia packing for their honeymoon. Part of me wondered if I should feel something, sadness, anger, betrayal. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of being the responsible one, tired of cleaning up his messes, tired of sharing a face with someone who saw the world as something to take from. Saturday morning arrived clear and warm. The wedding was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon at an oceanfront venue with white chairs and flower arrangements and a guitarist playing soft music as guests arrived. I wore a suit similar to the one Marcus would be wearing. Detective Chen and 2 other officers waited in an unmarked car around the corner. I arrived early, before most of the guests, stood in the back near the entrance, partially hidden by a decorative palm. Watched as people filed in, dressed in their wedding best, smiling, chatting, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Sophia walked down the aisle at exactly 2:15, beautiful in a simple white dress, her father's arm linked with hers. She saw me standing in the back. Our eyes met for just a second. She gave the smallest nod. And then Marcus appeared at the altar. My face. My name on the program clutched in every guest's hand. Erick Mendez, successful consultant, beloved fiancé, completely fabricated identity. The officiant began speaking. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. I waited until he asked if anyone had objections. The traditional moment, the dramatic pause where silence is expected. I stepped forward into the center aisle. Actually, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the venue, I object. Every head turned. A ripple of confusion swept through the crowd. Marcus saw me and froze. His face went white. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Perfect mirror images, identical twins, standing 50 feet apart. I'm Erick Mendez, I said, addressing the room, and that man at the altar has been impersonating me for the past 6 months. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, everything happened at once. Detective Chen and his officers entered. Marcus tried to run, but made it maybe 3 steps before they had him in handcuffs.
Sophia collapsed into a chair, her father catching her. Guests erupted in shocked murmurs, some standing, some reaching for their phones. I walked up the aisle slowly, deliberately, until I stood face to face with Marcus. Up close, I could see the small differences. The way he held himself, trying to copy my posture but not quite getting it right. The cologne I'd never wear. The watch on his wrist that he'd charged to one of my credit cards. Why? I asked, quietly, just for him. He didn't answer immediately. Detective Chen was reading him his rights, but Marcus kept his eyes locked on mine. Finally, he spoke. Because you always had it easier. Everything just worked for you. I wanted to know what that felt like. I shook my head. I worked for everything I have. You just took it. They led him away after that. Through the crowd of stunned wedding guests, past the flower arrangements and the untouched champagne fountain and the cake that would never be cut. I watched him go, watched the officers put him in the back of their cruiser, and felt nothing but a strange, hollow relief. Sophia approached me afterward, mascara streaked down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know." "I know," I said. "He's good at lying. Always has been." She asked me what would happen next. I told her the truth. Investigations, court proceedings, restitution if any of the money could be recovered. The townhouse would likely have to be sold since the mortgage was fraud. Her savings might be lost. It would be messy and painful and take a long time to untangle. She nodded, tears still falling. Then she said something I didn't expect. "Thank you for stopping this before it went any further." I left the venue an hour later after giving my statement to the officers, drove back to my efficiency apartment, packed my single suitcase, and checked out. I had a flight back to Portland that evening. At the airport, waiting at the gate, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos I'd taken over the past 3 weeks. Evidence, documentation, proof of every lie. I'd already uploaded everything to the cloud, sent copies to Detective Chen, backed it up 3 different ways. But there was one photo I kept coming back to. Marcus and me, when we were 7 years old, sitting on the front steps of our childhood home, identical in every way, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera like the world was ours to share. I looked at that photo for a long time, wondered when it had all gone wrong, when he'd decided we were competitors instead of partners, when sharing my face had become a weapon instead of a bond. The flight attendant called my boarding group. I stood, deleted the photo, and walked toward the plane. The flight back to Portland felt longer than it should have. I had a window seat but kept the shade down, preferring the dim cabin lighting to the brightness outside. The man next to me tried making small talk during takeoff, something about a conference he'd attended in Miami. I gave him polite one-word answers until he took the hint and opened his laptop instead. I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's face when he saw me. That flash of recognition followed immediately by panic. For just a second, he'd looked like the kid who used to wake me up at midnight because he'd had a nightmare and didn't want to be alone. Then the mask slipped back on, and he was just a stranger wearing my face, caught in a lie too big to explain away. Detective Chen had promised to keep me updated on the charges. Identity theft, mortgage fraud, filing false reports, the list went on. With the evidence I'd compiled, the case was airtight. Marcus would likely take a plea deal to avoid trial. His lawyer would argue mitigating circumstances, childhood trauma, whatever narrative they could spin. But the facts were simple. He'd stolen my identity, faked his death, and built an entire fake life on my credit and credentials. I landed at Portland International just after 9 that evening. The air was cool and damp, typical Pacific Northwest spring weather. I picked up my truck from long-term parking and drove home through quiet streets. My house looked exactly as I'd left it 3 weeks ago. Small craftsman-style bungalow in a working-class neighborhood, nothing fancy, but mine. Actually mine. Paid for with money I'd earned, deeded in my real name. Inside, everything was dusty. Mail had piled up by the slot in the door. I gathered it into a stack and dropped it on the kitchen counter without looking through it. Too tired, too wrung out. I just wanted a shower and my own bed. But sleep didn't come easy. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the whole thing. Every small clue I'd missed while Marcus was setting up his scheme. The photocopied documents, the strange charges I'd dismissed as merchant errors. That last argument we'd had about money, when he'd looked at me with something close to hatred and said I'd never understand what it was like to struggle. Maybe he was right. Things had always come easier to me. School, work, relationships. Not because life handed me anything, but because I showed up and did the work. Marcus wanted shortcuts. wanted results without effort. And when that didn't materialize, he'd decided to just take mine instead. I must have finally dozed off around 3 because I woke to sunlight streaming through the blinds and the sound of someone knocking on my front door. I checked the time, just past 7, pulled on jeans and a t-shirt and went to answer it. A courier stood on my porch holding a thick manila envelope. "Sign here," he said, offering a tablet. I scrawled my signature and took the package. Law Offices of Chen and Associates. I knew what this was before I even opened it. Inside were legal documents. Notifications of charges filed against Marcus. A victim impact statement form for me to complete. A letter from the district attorney's office outlining the prosecution timeline. Everything official, formal, the machinery of justice grinding into motion. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table reading through each page carefully. They were charging Marcus with 12 separate felonies. Each one carried potential prison time. The letter estimated trial wouldn't begin for at least 6 months, possibly longer if he fought extradition, since he'd been arrested in Florida for crimes that spanned multiple states. My phone rang. Detective Chen. I answered on the second ring. "Morning, Mr. Mendez. Just wanted to update you. Your brother made his first court appearance yesterday. Pleaded not guilty, posted bail through a bondsman. He's out?" I set down my coffee cup harder than I meant to. "For now. He had to surrender his passport and agree to GPS monitoring. He's not going anywhere." The detective paused. "There's something else. He's asking to meet with you." I almost laughed. Why would I do that? "You don't have to." I told him I'd pass along the request. He claims he wants to apologize, explain things. Personally, I think he's hoping you'll drop the charges, but that's not how this works. The state is prosecuting regardless. "Tell him no," I said. "We don't have anything to talk about." After I hung up, I tried to get back to normal life. Opened the garage, started working on the Mustang I'd abandoned 3 weeks ago. But my hands felt clumsy on the tools. My mind kept drifting. Every car that drove past made me tense. Every customer who came through the door got studied a second too long, like I was checking to make sure they were who they claimed to be. Trust becomes a fragile thing once it's been shattered. Even trusting myself felt complicated now. I'd missed so many signs. Let Marcus get away with smaller betrayals for years because he was family, because we shared blood and history and that stupid bond that comes from sharing a womb for 9 months. A week passed, then another. I fell back into routines: work, home, sleep. The legal process moved forward without requiring much from me. Detective Chen called occasionally with updates. Marcus had hired an expensive lawyer. They were trying to negotiate a plea deal. The mortgage company was pursuing a separate civil case for the fraudulent loan. Sophia called me once, asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, though I wasn't sure why. We met at a cafe downtown on a Tuesday afternoon. She looked thinner than I remembered, dark circles under her eyes despite the makeup. "I'm trying to understand," she said after we'd ordered, "how someone could do that, lie so completely. I thought I knew him." "You knew who he was pretending to be," I said. "That's different." She stirred her coffee without drinking it. "I've been going to therapy, trying to process it all. My therapist says I ignored red flags because I wanted the fairy tale. But I don't even know what the red flags were. Everything seemed normal. That's what he's good at, making the abnormal seem normal. He's had a lifetime of practice." We talked for almost an hour. She told me about the wedding planning, the dreams they'd shared for the future, the way he'd proposed on a beach at sunset with a ring he'd charged to one of my credit cards. She apologized again for her part in it, even though she'd been a victim too. Before we left, she asked one question that stuck with me. "Do you think he ever really cared about me? Or was I just part of the con?" I thought about that carefully before answering. "I think he cared about what you represented. Legitimacy, a normal life, proof that he could be someone worth loving. But whether he loved you specifically, or just the idea of being loved, I honestly don't know." She nodded slowly. "That's what I figured." Another month passed. Spring turned to early summer. The Mustang got finished and picked up by its owner, a retired teacher who cried when she saw how I'd restored it. I took on new projects, a 72 Nova, an 84 Bronco that needed a full engine rebuild. The work kept my hands busy even when my mind wandered. Then, one evening in June, Marcus showed up at my garage. I was closing up for the day, pulling down the bay door, when I saw him standing by the fence. He'd lost weight, looked older somehow, though we were still identical in the ways that mattered. Same face, same build, different everything else. "I know you said no," he started, "but I needed to try one more time." I locked the bay door and turned to face him. "You're not supposed to be here. Pretty sure your bail conditions include staying away from me." He held up both hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want 5 minutes, that's all. Then I'll leave and you'll never see me again." Against my better judgment, I listened. We stood there in the fading light while he talked. He told me about going to Thailand, burning through his savings in 6 months, realizing he had no skills anyone wanted to pay for, how he'd thought about calling home but pride stopped him, how the idea started small, just using my name to get a job interview, then snowballed into something he couldn't control. "I got caught up in it," he said, "became you, started believing my own story. Sophia made it easy. She loved who she thought I was. I didn't want to disappoint her." "So you faked your death?" I said flatly. "Stole my identity? Ruined my credit? Committed about a dozen felonies? All because you didn't want to disappoint your girlfriend?" He flinched. "When you say it like that, it sounds worse." "It is worse. There's no version of this that isn't worse." He looked at his shoes. "I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to understand it wasn't personal. I wasn't trying to hurt you." That actually made me angry. The first real anger I'd felt since this whole thing started. Not personal? Marcus, you stole my life, my name, my social security number. You let me believe you were dead. I grieved for you. How is that not personal? He didn't have an answer for that, just stood there looking miserable and small. Finally, he said, "Are you really going to let them send me to prison?" "I don't have a choice. The state is prosecuting. I didn't press charges. You earned them. You could ask them to drop it. Tell them we worked it out. Family matter." I shook my head. "You know what the worst part is? I would have helped you if you'd just asked. If you'd called me from Thailand and said you were broke and desperate, I would have wired you money, would have helped you find a job when you got back. But you didn't want help. You wanted to be me. And that's something I can't fix." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded once. "Okay, I get it." I turned to walk to my truck. Marcus called after me one last time. "For what it's worth," he said, "you were always the better twin. I just couldn't accept it." I drove home through heavy traffic, his words echoing in my head. The better twin. Like we'd been competing all along and I hadn't even known we were in a race. That night, I pulled out a shoebox from my closet. Old photos from childhood. Marcus and me at various ages. First day of kindergarten, matching backpacks, Halloween costumes where we'd dressed as each other just to confuse people, birthday parties where we'd blown out candles on the same cake, Little League where we'd played on the same team and developed our own twin language for signals. Looking at those photos, I tried to pinpoint when things changed, when he started seeing me as the enemy instead of his other half. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe there was no single moment. Maybe he'd always felt like he was in my shadow, and I'd just been too oblivious to notice. I called my aunt in Sacramento, my dad's sister, the only family we had left. Told her everything. She listened without interrupting, then sighed deeply. "Your father worried about Marcus," she said. "Saw something in him, a need for validation that could never be filled. He hoped you two would balance each other out, that you'd keep Marcus grounded and he'd help you loosen up. Didn't work out that way," I said. "No. I'm sorry, Eric. I know this must be devastating." "Actually," I said, "it's clarifying. I spent years making excuses for him, explaining away his behavior, covering his debts. This forced me to see him clearly. That's worth something." After we hung up, I put the photos back in the box, and the box back in the closet, not throwing them away, but not keeping them accessible either. Archived, like Marcus himself would soon be.
The plea deal came through in July. Marcus agreed to plead guilty to 6 felony counts in exchange for the rest being dropped. Sentencing was scheduled for late August. The prosecution recommended 4 years with possibility of parole after 2. I attended the sentencing hearing, sat in the gallery with Detective Chen and a victim advocate the DA's office had assigned to my case. Marcus wore a suit and sat at the defense table with his lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd clearly prepared him well. He looked appropriately remorseful, kept his head down, spoke in measured tones when the judge addressed him. His lawyer argued for leniency.
Talked about his difficult childhood, though we'd had the same childhood. Mentioned his struggles with identity and self-worth. Painted him as someone who'd made terrible choices but wasn't fundamentally a bad person. Then it was my turn. The judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood and walked to the podium, aware of Marcus watching me from the defense table. I kept it brief, described the impact of his actions, the financial damage that would take years to fully repair, the violation of trust, the grief I'd felt believing he was dead. I didn't attack him or demand maximum punishment, just laid out the facts calmly, the same way I documented everything else. When I finished and returned to my seat, the judge took a recess to consider the sentence. 45 minutes later, we reconvened. The judge gave him 3 years in a federal facility, ordered restitution for all documented financial losses, which my lawyer had calculated at just over $70,000, including the mortgage fraud, stolen credit, and legal fees. Marcus would also have 5 years probation after release. He was taken into custody immediately. As the marshals let him out, he looked back once. Our eyes met. I didn't look away, didn't nod or acknowledge him in any way, just watched until he disappeared through the door. Outside the courthouse, the victim advocate asked if I felt closure. I thought about it. Not closure, I said. Resolution. There's a difference. The next few months were quiet. I worked, paid down the debts Marcus had created, slowly rebuilt my credit score. The townhouse in Coral Gables eventually got foreclosed on. Sophia had moved back to California, trying to start over with her family's support. I dated a little, nothing serious. Found it hard to open up, to trust that people were who they claimed to be. My therapist, a patient woman named Dr. Reeves who specialized in trauma, said that was normal. That betrayal by family cuts deeper than other kinds because it violates our fundamental sense of safety. One evening in October, I got a letter from Marcus. Prison mail, postmarked from the federal facility in Sheridan. I almost threw it away unopened. Instead, I made tea, sat at my kitchen table, and carefully slit the envelope. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten in that same slanted scrawl. He apologized again, explained that prison was giving him time to think, to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. He was in therapy, participating in programs, trying to become someone better. The last paragraph stood out. He wrote that he understood if I never forgave him, that he didn't deserve forgiveness, but he wanted me to know that pretending to be me had taught him something, that living as me, even for those few months, had shown him what his life could have been if he'd made different choices. And that lesson, painful as it was, might be the only good thing to come from this whole disaster. I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it in a drawer with all the other documentation, not as evidence, just as a record. Proof that this happened, that my brother had stolen my identity and I'd taken it back. I never wrote back. Winter came. The garage stayed busy with people wanting their classics prepped for storage. I hired an assistant, a kid fresh out of technical school who reminded me a little of myself at that age, eager, hardworking, honest. On Christmas Eve, I drove out to the cemetery where my parents were buried, brought flowers for both plots, stood there in the cold and told them what had happened with Marcus. Told them I was okay, that I was moving forward, that I was learning to trust again, slowly, carefully, but genuinely. I don't know if they heard me, don't know if that's even how it works, but saying it out loud helped. Back home, I made dinner for one, watched the snow start to fall through my kitchen window. My phone buzzed with messages, friends checking in, my aunt sending family photos, an invitation to a New Year's party from a woman I'd gone on a few dates with. Normal life, ordinary moments, mine.
The next morning, I woke to 6 inches of fresh snow and a power outage that had killed my heat. Spent the day fixing the generator and clearing the driveway. Mundane problems with practical solutions. The kind of day where I didn't think about Marcus at all. Didn't check my credit report or look over my shoulder. That's when I knew I'd actually moved on. Not because the anger was gone. It still flared up sometimes, usually at random moments. But because hours could pass, sometimes entire days, where he wasn't the central narrative of my life anymore. I was just Erick Mendez again, not the victim of identity theft, not the twin whose brother betrayed him. Just me, working on cars, paying my mortgage, building something real and lasting and completely my own. In January, I got notification that Marcus was being transferred to a different facility, something about overcrowding. I filed the paperwork without much thought. His restitution payments had started coming through, small amounts deducted from his prison wages, $50 a month. At that rate, it would take decades to repay what he'd stolen. But I wasn't doing this for the money, never had been. I was doing it because actions have consequences, because trust, once broken, requires accountability to have any chance of repair. Because my father had once told me that integrity means doing the right thing even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. February brought more snow and a steady stream of work. I started teaching an evening class at the community college, basic auto mechanics for beginners. Found I enjoyed it, breaking down complex systems into understandable parts, watching people's faces light up when something clicked. One of my students was a woman about my age, Sarah, who was rebuilding a Jeep with her teenage daughter. She stayed after class sometimes to ask questions. We talked about engines and transmissions, and eventually about other things. Movies we'd seen, books we'd read. The careful small talk of people testing whether friendship might be possible. I didn't tell her about Marcus right away. Didn't lead with the trauma. Just let her get to know me as I was now, not as defined by what had happened to me. Spring arrived slowly. The snow melted. Crocuses pushed through in my neglected garden. I started running in the mornings, something I hadn't done since high school. Felt good to push my body, to focus on breathing and footfalls and nothing else. In April, Dr. Reeves asked if I'd considered visiting Marcus. Not for his benefit, she clarified, for yours. To see him in that context, to close that loop. I thought about it for weeks. Part of me wanted to refuse on principle, but another part, the part that was healing, recognized she might be right. I scheduled a visitation for a Saturday in May. Drove to the facility, went through security, sat in a sterile room with bolted-down furniture, and waited. Marcus walked in wearing prison blues. He'd lost more weight, looked smaller somehow, like incarceration was compressing him. We sat across from each other, a scratched plastic barrier between us. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I didn't come for you," I replied. "I came because I needed to see this, to see you here, to make it real." He nodded. "I understand." We talked for maybe 20 minutes, surface-level stuff mostly. How he was adjusting to prison life, what programs he was in. He asked about the garage, about Portland, about people we'd both known. I answered briefly, offering no details he could use, no openings for manipulation. Near the end, he asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I considered lying, saying yes to make the moment easier. Instead, I told the truth. "I don't know. Maybe someday."
But not today. Not soon. You didn't just steal my identity, Marcus. You stole time I spent grieving someone who wasn't dead. You stole my sense of safety. You stole my ability to trust easily. Those things don't come back just because you're sorry. He absorbed that. Looked like he wanted to argue, but didn't. "Fair enough," he finally said. The guards signaled our time was up. I stood to leave. Marcus called out one last thing. "For what it's worth, you're building a good life. Better than anything I could have faked." I left without responding. The drive home felt lighter somehow. Dr. Reeves had been right. Seeing him there, contained and consequence-facing, had shifted something. Made the whole thing feel finished in a way the sentencing hadn't. That summer, I took a vacation. First real one in years. Drove down the Oregon coast, stayed in small motels, ate at diners, watched the ocean, and thought about nothing in particular. Sarah came with me. We'd been seeing each other for a few months by then, taking it slow, both of us cautious for our own reasons. On a beach south of Cannon Beach, she asked me about the scar above my eyebrow. I told her about the bike race with Marcus, how we'd been so focused on beating each other that neither of us saw the pothole until too late, how we'd both crashed and sat there bleeding and laughing because the whole thing was so stupid. "You miss him," she observed. "I miss who I thought he was," I corrected. "The brother I grew up with. But that person might never have existed. Might have just been who he pretended to be until pretending got too hard." She took my hand. "That must be lonely." "It was," I admitted. "It's getting better." We stayed until sunset, watching the light change across the water. When we finally headed back to the car, I realized I'd gone an entire day without thinking about identity theft or court dates or stolen lives. Just existed. Just been. That night, lying in a motel bed, listening to the ocean through thin walls, I thought about Detective Chen's words from months ago. "You documented everything. Most people don't do that." He'd meant it as a compliment. Thoroughness, preparation. But I realized it was also armor, a way to control the uncontrollable, to make sense of senselessness through spreadsheets and highlighted bank statements and time-stamped evidence. I'd needed that armor then. Maybe didn't need it as much anymore. By fall, Sarah and I had moved in together. Her daughter Maya spent weekends with us, a 15-year-old who inherited her mother's mechanical aptitude and her father's stubbornness. She helped in the garage sometimes, learning to change oil and rotate tires, asking endless questions about how engines worked. One Saturday afternoon, while Maya was under the hood of the Jeep, Sarah pulled me aside. "She's been asking about your family," she said quietly. "I told her you'd talk about it when you were ready, but I think she's curious why she's never met any of your relatives." I watched Maya work, her movements careful and deliberate, following the instructions I'd written out for her. "What do you think I should tell her?" "The truth," Sarah said. "Age-appropriate version, but the truth. Kids can handle more than we think." That evening over pizza, I told Maya about Marcus. Kept it simple. Explained that I had a twin brother who'd made some very bad choices and was in prison. That sometimes people we love disappoint us in ways we can't fix. That family is complicated. Maya listened carefully, then asked, "Do you still love him?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know," I admitted. "I love the brother I thought I had, but that person might not have been real." She considered this while picking pepperoni off her slice. "My dad wasn't who I thought he was either," she said. "Mom says sometimes we love the idea of people more than the actual people." "Your mom's pretty smart." "Yeah," she said, grinning at Sarah. "She is." Winter came again. Marcus's second winter behind bars. I got occasional updates from the prison system. He'd completed some kind of vocational program, was working in the facilities maintenance department. Stayed out of trouble as far as I could tell. I didn't visit again, didn't write. Just let him serve his time while I lived mine. In February, on what would have been our 30th birthday, I took the day off work. Sarah had suggested I do something meaningful, mark the occasion somehow. I drove out to the cemetery where my parents were buried, same as I'd done at Christmas. The ground was frozen solid, snow dusted across the headstones. I stood between their graves and talked to them about Marcus, about how he'd always been the one who needed more attention, more validation, more proof that he mattered. How I'd tried to be enough for both of us after they died, but couldn't be. "I think I finally understand," I told them. He wasn't competing with me. He was competing with some version of himself he could never measure up to. And somewhere along the way, he decided stealing my life was easier than building his own. The wind picked up, cutting through my jacket. I stayed a few more minutes, then drove to the coast. Walked the same beach Sarah and I had visited the previous summer. The ocean was gray and choppy, matching the sky. I found a flat stone and tried skipping it across the waves. It sank immediately. Marcus used to be better at skipping stones. Could get 5 or 6 bounces while I struggled for 2. Just one more thing he was naturally better at that didn't matter in the end. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Mendez, this is Counselor Patterson from Sheridan Federal. Your brother Marcus asked me to contact you." My stomach tightened.
Is something wrong? No, nothing like that. He wanted you to know he's being released early. Good behavior, program completion. His sentence got reduced. He'll be out in 2 weeks. I stood there on the beach, waves crashing behind me, processing this information. 2 weeks. Marcus would be free in 2 weeks. Does he know not to contact me? I asked. That's part of his probation conditions. Yes, sir, he's aware. He just wanted you to know. Said you deserved the heads up. After I own up, I sat down on a piece of driftwood and stared at the ocean for a long time. Part of me had gotten comfortable with Marcus being contained, knowing exactly where he was, knowing he couldn't hurt anyone from behind bars. Now he'd be out there again, free to make new choices, free to fall back into old patterns. I called Dr. Reeves from the beach. She squeezed me in for an emergency session that evening. How does it make you feel? She asked after I'd explained. Anxious, I admitted. Like I need to check my credit report every day again. Like I need to be ready for the next crisis. Do you think he'll try to contact you? I don't know. Part of me thinks prison changed him, but another part remembers every other time he swore he'd changed and didn't. Dr. Reeves leaned forward slightly. You've built good boundaries. You have systems in place. You're not the same person you were when this started. Trust that version of yourself. 2 weeks later, Marcus was released. I knew because the victim notification system sent an automated message. Offender Marcus Mendez has been released from custody. He was required to register at a halfway house in Eugene, 2 hours south of Portland. Had to meet weekly with a probation officer.
Couldn't leave Oregon without permission. I didn't hear from him directly. No letters, no attempts at contact, just silence. Spring arrived for the 3rd time since this whole thing started. The garage stayed busy. Maya was talking about maybe studying mechanical engineering in college. Sarah and I started looking at houses together, something bigger with a better workspace for the Jeep projects. Life moved forward, normal, stable, mine. Then one evening in late April, I was closing up the garage when I saw someone standing across the street. Just standing there, hands in pockets, watching. The street light wasn't quite bright enough to make out features, but something about the posture was familiar. I walked to the edge of the property. The figure didn't move. We stood there maybe 50 feet apart, just looking at each other across the empty street. Then he turned and walked away, disappeared around the corner without a word. I stood there for a long time after, my heart hammering, hands shaking slightly. Was it Marcus? Maybe. Probably. But he hadn't approached, hadn't tried to talk, just watched and left. I called Detective Chen the next morning, told him what happened. He said he'd contact Marcus's probation officer, make sure he understood the no-contact order was serious. But unless he actually approached me, there wasn't much they could do about him being in a public space. It happened twice more over the next month, always at distance, always silent. Him watching, me aware of being watched, neither of us crossing that invisible line. The 3rd time, I walked toward him instead of staying put. He saw me coming and turned to leave. I called out, just loud enough to carry. Whatever you're trying to say, just say it. He stopped, turned back. We stood maybe 20 feet apart now, close enough to see his face clearly. He looked healthier than in prison, hair cut shorter, clothes that fit properly. But his eyes held something I couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe? Or resignation. I'm not trying to say anything, he said quietly. Just wanted to see you were okay. I'm fine, no thanks to you. He nodded. I know. He paused, seemed to struggle with something. I'm leaving Oregon. Got a job offer in Arizona. Construction work. Fresh start. Just wanted to see you one more time before I go. Your probation officer know about Arizona? Approved it yesterday. Everything's legal this time, I promise. We stood there in the fading light. 2 men who shared everything except the ability to trust each other. I'm not going to wish you luck, I said finally. I'm not going to say I forgive you or that I hope things work out. But I'm also not going to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder waiting for you to mess up again. Fair, he said. That's fair. If you really want a fresh start, I continued, then actually start fresh. Don't just run from this. Learn from it. Become someone different, someone better. He looked at me for a long moment. "You turned out good, Erick. Better than me. Better than I could have been even if I'd tried." "You could have tried," I said. "That was always an option." "Yeah." He shoved his hands deeper in his pockets. "I know that now." He started to walk away, then stopped, turned back one more time. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on accountability, for making sure there were consequences. I needed that, even if I didn't know it." I didn't respond, just watched him walk away down the street, getting smaller and smaller until he turned a corner and disappeared. I stood there alone in the parking lot of my garage, the place I'd built with my own hands, paid for with money I'd earned, filled with projects that were actually mine. The evening air was cool. Somewhere nearby, someone was grilling. A dog barked. Life continuing in its mundane, beautiful way. My phone buzzed, Sarah asking if I was coming home for dinner. I texted back that I was on my way. That night, lying in bed with Sarah asleep beside me and Maya's music playing softly from down the hall, I thought about Marcus's words. "Thank you for not giving up on accountability." Maybe that was the real lesson in all this. Not revenge, not punishment, just accountability. The simple insistence that actions have consequences, that trust requires honesty, that you can't build anything real on a foundation of lies. I never saw Marcus again after that night. Heard through my aunt a year later that he was still in Arizona, still working construction, dating someone, taking things one day at a time. I hoped it was true. Hoped he'd finally figured out how to build his own life instead of stealing someone else's. But whether he did or didn't, it wasn't my concern anymore. Wasn't my responsibility. Wasn't my story to tell. My story was here, in this house, with this family, in that garage where I fixed things that were broken and helped people keep the vehicles they loved running. Sometimes Sarah asked if I ever regretted going to Miami, stopping the wedding, pursuing the charges. If I ever wished I'd just let it go, moved on quietly. The answer was always no. Not because I enjoyed what happened, not because I wanted Marcus to suffer, but because letting it go would have meant accepting that some people get to escape consequences for their choices, that betrayal can be overlooked if it's family doing the betraying, that my identity, my life, my name were things other people could claim without accountability. I'd learned to trust again, slowly, carefully, but genuinely. Learned that most people are who they claim to be, that betrayal, while possible, isn't inevitable, that building something real takes time and effort, but it's worth it. On our 32nd birthday, I didn't go to the cemetery, didn't think about Marcus much at all. Sarah and Maya surprised me with a cake. We ate it in the garage while working on the Jeep, getting frosting on our hands and laughing when Maya accidentally dropped a wrench on my foot. These were the moments that mattered. Not the dramatic confrontations or the legal victories or the perfect revenge. Just ordinary life. Messy and imperfect and completely genuinely mine. That evening, I found the old shoebox of photos again. Looked through them one more time. Marcus and me at every age. Identical faces, different people even then, if you knew what to look for. I kept one photo. The two of us at 7. Sitting on our front steps, arms around each other's shoulders. Not as a reminder of what I lost, but as proof of what I survived. Then I put the rest away for good. Some stories don't have neat endings. Some relationships can't be repaired. Some betrayals cut too deep to ever fully heal. But you can still build something good from the ruins, can still learn to trust, can still create a life worth living. That's what I did. That's what I'm still doing. And whatever Marcus is doing in Arizona, I genuinely hope he's doing the same. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.